deliberately got himself thrown out of the game. And what I've thought, when I think about that, when in terms of leadership, one of the important components of leadership is that the people that you are trying to lead are able to function without you. And that's very, very important. And people can get too dependent on the leader, and they don't really ever learn. So I don't think it's just a matter of the Coach Dale, wanting to give Shooter another chance, although that's a big part of it. But I think it's also for the benefit of the team themselves, to learn that even if he's not there, he has taught them so well that they can function without him. Now, one of the interesting parallels to church life, it seems to me, is something that I learned when I was doing interim work. And that is that parishes often report that they felt happiest and more like a team when they were looking for a rector rather than when they had a rector. And what's interesting, that's interesting to me, because the worst service in the Book of Common Prayer, by far, hands down, is the celebration of new ministry, which is a service that's done when a rector has been called, and it's if you will, the installation, which sounds like you're installing an appliance. We're installing our new rector. We're going to put him right there. The service, if clergy just followed the service as it's written, all it is one lay person after another coming to the rector saying, here, take this, here, take this, here, take this, here, take this, take this, take this, and take this. So that the message is that these folks are the real ministers doing the real ministry, and the congregation congregates. That's their job. So I've always found it fascinating that studies have shown that when churches are looking for, in other words, when they don't really have a leader, and they're forced to function without one, that's when they actually felt the best about themselves. And I think it behooves leaders, rectors, to try to give away as much ministry as they can and to not accept the responsibility for everything, which is very tempting to do. And in our denomination, and in denominations like ours, clericalism, that is clericalism is the assumption that it really is all about the priests. Clericalism is a disease. I really think it's a danger to congregations that can get over-focused on a priest. Or the priest.
I thought you were saying that clerical is
that the priesthood is a disease too. Yeah, that's another story.
But that I can see where that is true. But as being I've been on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a clerical, but I had 4 years with no priest,
mm-hmm.
or one that was just an interim. It's nice. I mean, it's great that the different groups function and make the church whole. But without the priests, good job, or, maybe you should do it this way once in a while, you feel like they're not doing anything. They're not part of the group.
The priest?
Yeah.
Okay, right. The interim. You're talking about the interim?
Or even wasn't a regular, we had a regular priest that wasn't part of the group. But,
What do you mean by not part of the group?
well, he just,
Showed up on Sunday.
yeah, just did his thing.
Oh, I see. I see. Well, obviously, there's got to be some sort of balance there.
I mean, if everybody's expected to do their own little thing, you know, without any input, then it gets kind of, you know, burnout or something. Like,
No, right. You're right. I think I was overemphasizing one side of it to make a point. That the flip side of that, of course, is that the laity are not involved in ministry because it's assumed that the priest is going to do it. Now, there are some ministries that everyone accepts as, you know, lay people. Acolytes, ushers, readers, altar guild, you know, these kinds of things, vestry, these are the kind of things that lay people participate in. But then there's this whole slew of other things. For example, praying with laying on of hands and anointing with oil. I know clergy who would say that lay people shouldn't do that.
Huh.
And I just think they're flat out wrong. And I think it's a difference in what is the function of the priesthood. I'm going to use a word, sacerdotal. Sacerdotal means having to do with priests. So there are sacerdotal functions like consecrating, blessing, absolving. So there are certain things that only a priest, in our denomination, only a priest can do. So the sacerdotal aspect of healing prayer, it seems to me, is the blessing of the oil, not the imposition of the oil. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. There are clergy who disagree with me about that, but I definitely think that's at best a gray area, or at worst, I should say, a gray area. But I would hate to see anyone who would ever follow me take that ministry away from the laity, because I think that would be a big mistake. And there are other things like here at Christ Church.
You're not going anywhere.
Well, I'm not going to be here forever. Because no one lives forever.
Longer than me, you're going to stay here for a while.
Well, I didn't say that to get you all nervous. I'm not going anywhere. I have no plans to go anywhere for a long time. So Christ Church has the benefit of someone in the past at Christ Church developed a ministry of the laity that includes pastoral care, for example, so that's shared among the clergy and the lay people. And there's a real benefit to that, it seems to me. When the expectation is that the priest is the only minister who can do that, then if there's any hope for growth, you'll get to a point where it can no longer happen. And that's generally known as the 200 barrier. I'm not going to be able to, I have this thing locked so the kids can't get into it. Now I can't remember the code to get into it. So it's a studied, documented fact in any organization. Remember that star of human relationships. Okay, so expand that out to 150 people. 150 people seems to be the number at which one person can maintain some measure of relationship with everybody else. Beyond that, it's impossible. And as it turns out, the congregation with 150 in average Sunday attendance turns out to be a very, very significant barrier, and very few congregations are able to push past it. And the reason they can't push past it is that once they get into what's called this transition between roughly 150 to 200, you get people start to feel like, this isn't a warm church like it used to be. We don't feel like a family anymore, or the priest doesn't know me. These kind of things start to crop up. Well, and that's to be expected because you're at your limit. The only way through that is to come up with a new way of what it means to be church. If the church is centered around the pastor, and churches that are under 150 are called pastoral-sized churches, the pastoral church is centered around the pastor, more or less the spoke. Once you get 200 and above, now you're in the program level church. And I don't want to push the word program too much, but instead of having the priest at the center, now what you have are ministry groups that function more or less like small groups, that people can know each other, have a sense of belonging because of that group. And that has taken the place of the priest at the center of everything. And the priest becomes increasingly a leader to leaders rather than a pastor to everyone, because it's just simply not possible. And it gets even more complicated after you push past, say, 350. Now, once you get to churches that are 500 or more, those clergy rectors are probably more like a CEO. And that may sound really, really bad, but here's a statistic worth meditating on. Most churches in the Episcopal Church have fewer than 75 people in average Sunday attendance.
Where do we lie?
We're right around there. Just a little bit over 75. I think we're, maybe 90 in average Sunday attendance. Now, that's the most churches. Most people go to churches of 350 or more. So if you took all of the Episcopalians in the country and asked them, what church do you go to? They would say, I go to a program-sized church or larger. Okay? Whereas most physical churches have average Sunday attendance of 75 or less. What that suggests is that the larger churches are able to do the things that are needed, that people need, better than the smaller churches.
Now, is getting through that threshold partly a lack of people willing to do ministry, or is it because there's not enough people to help keep those small groups together, like 2 or 3 leaders per group, so that nobody burns out, like Dixie was saying? Is that why the small churches can't grow to those bigger sizes?
No, I think that well, in part, I think though it's an emotional process. Okay, which has really been the key to this whole leadership course. So the emotional processes that are at work in the smaller congregation can be labeled with terms like family. And so we're close, we're a family, we know each other, everyone knows everybody. And so when, just take the priest out of the equation, just think about it from your own point of view. How many people would it take until you felt uncomfortable in terms of the size of the parish, until you began to wonder, is this the same close church that I've always known? Now it's different. And that emotional bridge is very, very hard to cross. Very, very hard to cross. for, I wish it were simple, but it isn't. And the axiom is that small churches are getting smaller and large churches are getting larger.
And so in a way, it's the type people gravitate to the church they're more comfortable with, a family-style church or a group-style church.
Well, I mean, they gravitate to it, except that in the family or pastoral-sized church, there's this weird dynamic, is that if people kept coming and they started growing, you would end up with a revolving door at some point, where people would come in and then they would go out.
Okay.
They would come in and then they would go out. Groups have a knack for what's called homeostasis, for keeping everything in balance the way it is. And how that happens is sometimes mysterious, but it's uncanny how a church of 75 or so will stay at 75 or so, or decrease in size, but they will not grow. They will not get larger. Now, Christ Church is an anomaly in this. So here's the hope for Christ Church, is that you have in your history, there's been a time when this church was large, of 500 or more. And so in the DNA of Christ Church is a belief that the church can still function and be a church when it's larger and the clergy are not necessarily at the center of everything and involved in everything. But as a church gets smaller, the pressure for the priest to take on that sort of pastoral role increases. And if the church is not, if we want to say, for example, that Christ Church is not going to grow and we're going to be happy with that, well then, okay, we can let that dynamic follow its course. But if the idea is we want to grow, then we can't let that sort of emotional process to take over. We need to make sure that we keep lay ministry involved the way it's been working for decades. Otherwise, we'll just, because of the way things work. That's just the way things work. Even in the military, the way military structures their people is based on this model. So you've got squads, platoons, companies, battalions, okay? And as the numbers of people grow, the number of officers in charge of all of them also grow.
So there's so many squads to a platoon.
Right, and so in a battalion, which can be, I don't know, let's say it's 500 people. Okay. Well, the colonel or general who's in charge of that battalion, probably a colonel or a major who's in charge of that battalion, is not going to know every man in that battalion. Not going to happen. So if you have an expectation, tough, okay? You know your sergeant. Your sergeant knows the lieutenant. The lieutenant knows the captain. The captain knows the major. Okay, that's the way it works. And that's because that's the way human systems work. This is no accident that the military is designed that way. Yeah.
Denominationally, where do Episcopalians fall in program churches? So I'm assuming non-denominational probably has the largest program church thing. Where would this, and I know that Roman Catholic falls very low in their systems. Where do you think Episcopalians fall with, like, how many program churches are there?
Yeah, that's it. I no longer know that statistic. And the bad news is that it's been getting worse, not better.
Because my understanding is when, as you're talking about this, program churches was kind of a new theme in the last couple of decades. And when we had the 500 people here, I don't think that it was because it was a program church. I think it was because we had multiple priests who took on the role for different people. So some people were with Cheney, and some people were with Goodnow. Well, you know, they had their priest, they had their service.
Right.
We had 4 different, 5 different services on Sunday, and some were the sheriff.
Right,
some
right.
were family. So it was like,
Right.
it was more, it was still very Episcopal, so
Yep.
very much, it's just it fed different people at different times.
Right, right. And that's a very good observation. That's a very good point. So, and it's worth bringing that up. So, if you're a pastoral-sized church and you do grow, the way to solve the emotional problem of the transition is to get a new priest, to get another priest. But in the 1960s, you could probably do that when the salary for clergy was, you know, whatever.
Survival.
Well, it was basically doable.
Yeah.
Now, it is not. It just is not. You know, in that way, Christ Church is really an anomaly. And don't forget that Carolyn's salary is being paid on faith, and it's been that way since we started with her. That it was, we're going to take from the endowment to pay for a family ministry position. And at one level, what we've wanted to happen has happened. People have come in. There continue to be new people showing up because of family ministry, but it's not keeping up with attrition. So just in the last week or so, not week, a month or so, another family has shown up. They were here in church with their kids when the kids were singing a few weeks ago. We had some people show up for the organ concert. It remains to be seen whether we'll see them again. They said they would come back, but I haven't seen them yet. So that kind of thing is happening. People are coming, but people have been dying. And so it's been very, very difficult to keep up with the attrition. So at one level, I think it's fair to say that the vestry's been very, very happy with family ministry, but at the same time, it goes, I mean, it's obvious that it hasn't generated people to pay for itself. And I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know.
That wasn't the plan. You're careful on that.
What?
The plan wasn't to make something pay for itself. That's not.
Oh, actually, my understanding was that was the point of it being temporary. I think originally it was 5 years, and then the vestry's been approving it each year to continue.
How long have you been here?
I've been here 8.
8 years?
This month. As a matter of fact, today. Today. I mean, because I think I started on November 10th, 8 years ago, and it's November 11th right now. So.
Because I came in June, the same year you came.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like I've been here longer than 8 years.
Yeah. So.
Well, you've been longer than I have.
It's a real dilemma. So it only stresses even more that if a church is going to grow, then they have to somehow get past this emotional barrier and figure out a new way of being church that doesn't involve a priest having to be at the center of everything, because they normally are not affordable until you get to 350 or so on a Sunday morning.
Now, is that covering all services or each service?
What do you mean?
350 people on a Sunday, is that?
That's total. That's total.
Okay.
I mean, generally speaking, I mean, if you assume that, you know, the average pledge is $1,500, and 350 people do not translate to 350 pledges, so maybe it's a half to 3/4 of that would be pledges. So do the math. Let's say it's 150 times 1,500 is only 150,000. And medical insurance. Let's just take that for an example. Medical insurance for a family is almost $2,000 a month. So when it comes to Carolyn, for example, the benefit is that we don't need another medical plan. Okay? Because if we had hired a priest, I don't see how we could have done it. And I just don't see it could even have been possible to do it.
We're trying to leave two
Right.
full-time.
So even when, I wish I had my marker. So even if a church stays the same at 75 and they don't lose anybody, expenses are still doing this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And so even those churches, we are now at a point where churches of 75 people cannot afford a full-time priest.
Why Good Shepherd closed?
That's why Good Shepherd closed.
Because the
Right.
people stayed and prices went up.
Yep. How many do you remember what the ASA was around the time you closed? 50?
Yeah, maybe around that, but maybe only, maybe 2/3 of that were actually people coming to church.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we got spread out over different churches. Some people left and never went to another church
Yeah.
I'm aware of.
Yeah.
They're not any of the churches around here.
Yeah,
So,
Yep. And that's been happening all over the Diocese of Western Mass.
And I don't know if this has happened in the Episcopal Church, but a girlfriend of mine is Catholic, and her priest is running 3 separate buildings in different towns and having to do 3 services a day in different towns. Maybe one church only has Saturday service this week, and the other 2 services are real early and then later in the afternoon on Sunday, so he's not going completely bonkers. Or maybe, I forget, maybe they were rotating, this week it's at this church, this week it's at, but somehow or another, this one priest is running 3 church buildings.
yeah,
I can't see how that can.
Oh yeah, yoked. That's increasingly a way they were trying to deal with this kind of dilemma. And now you're back to you have a priest who's coming on Sunday, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
You really have a glorified supply priest.
Or I had a friend that was an Episcopal priest, but had also a congregational church. So it was shared ministry in 2 different denominations.
Right. All right, we got to stop. It's 5 after 10. But this is an interesting conversation. If you're on Facebook, if you go to my Facebook page, I recently posted a TED Talk by a guy who's talking about charities and this dilemma that we have in this country where people don't want their charity dollars to go for overhead. They want all their money to go for the work of the charity. Well, how does that work? I mean, and very interesting thing. He just really quickly, he talks about advertising, for example. People don't want their money to go to advertising. And forgetting the fact that if they did advertise, they could turn $170,000 into $17 million. Okay, if they paid for advertising. If they could see that by paying for advertising, they're actually contributing to the work of the charity.